Thanks. Welcome, everybody. Yeah, we're talking LTMS. LTMS is now part of probably everybody's vocabulary. It links well with DMMO, IAA, 40-40-20, all these things that we've maybe come to grow and love, but they weren't always around prior to the LTMS. It's kind of changed the community, the dredging community. We're in the 12th year of the LTMS, and so we're in the review period, as John mentioned. And now we're culminating that 4 meetings that have happened, and there's a report due in 2013. It's going to talk about the background info, issues and comments by the stakeholders, and conclusions to date. And this workshop, the past and future of LTMS, we'll set the stage for that report, and we'll hopefully let the dredging community formulate any new questions that we may have to that report. And I look forward to the panel discussion as we go forward. Our first panelist will be from the EPA, Jason Brush, and he's a supervisor for Region 9 Wetland Office, and is EPA's representative of LTMS. And he's managed the office for 3 years and has worked in the dredging and wetland programs since 2001, and was on the DMMO roundtable for a couple of years. And he holds a master's degree from Kent State and a bachelor's from UCSC. Don't want to say that wrong. And lives in San Francisco with his wife and new daughter, which there's a picture of in the handout. So if you want to go ahead, Jason.
Thank you, everyone, for having me this morning. Thank you to John and Jim for inviting me. My name is Jason Brush. Again, I'm the EPA's representative on the LTMS Management Committee, and happy to talk to you this morning for a brief perspective on EPA's involvement in the LTMS and where we are today, 12 years into the program. Just briefly beforehand, I wanted to just mention or acknowledge some of you with history in the program. Maybe we're expecting Alexis Strauss here in this seat. That's been her role for many years, and she has moved to be our Deputy Regional Administrator at EPA Region 9. And with the dredging program as part of the 404 program within EPA's organization, I've stepped into this role here. So joining my esteemed colleagues here, Larry and Colonel Baker, all 3 of us are relative newbies to the programs compared to many of you out there. So the LTMS was designed in 2000 to have a 12-year look back, and that's the process we've been in over the last year, with a series of public meetings that many of you have been involved in. And as John mentioned, we're keenly involved in getting public stakeholder input from all sectors and incorporating that into the report that's coming out early next year for the look backwards. And in a sense, this is almost an unofficial 5th public meeting, as John said, to get that. So I look forward to your questions and to the discussion that will follow after our panel. The LTMS was a program that came about when we were in a very challenging place in the Bay Area for dredging. There was what's known as mudlock and projects just not getting done, and the environmentalist community being very concerned about impacts from dredging, and it was just not a good situation for anyone. So LTMS came along to set some goals and set some structures in place and policy that would help get us back on track and move commerce through the Bay as is critical, while doing that in an environmentally sound way and getting some environmental benefit when we can out of the projects, as opposed to just minimizing their detriments. So it was from the get-go designed to balance several factors and public concerns. And set goals for minimizing the input of dredged material that had been, for example, mounting up in the Alcatraz disposal site, minimizing that input to the bay and maximizing beneficial reuse. Some of the benefits include reducing the risk to bay resources, making that more certain, providing a structure in the form of DMMO for agencies to come, for dredgers to come and have a one-stop shop to get agency approvals on suitability determinations. And again, also gives the agencies more certainty on the environmental outcomes of dredging projects. And reuse for wetlands creation, beach nourishment, other beneficial uses became part of the conversation more, and part of the expectation that we would be building towards a more economically sound and environmentally sound bay. In our view, I think the goals that we set out 12 years ago have largely been met to date. We have challenges ahead, but our preliminary take from a series of very productive public meetings is that we've been very successful in meeting the goals of stepping down the input to the bay, encouraging beneficial reuse, etc. There's no doubt that in order to fully implement the goals, the largest challenge before us is funding, and that's a theme I'm sure folks will echo on all sides of the interests here today, that dredging has become more expensive from the dredger's point of view, and beneficial reuse all the more so. And implementing our program has become more expensive in the sense that we've had many cuts to agencies' budgets, and the funding in the future is uncertain at best. But the goals have largely been met to date in EPA's view, and we believe so far that the goals still are relatively a good balance and are worth keeping. For sea level rise in particular, we really believe that the beneficial reuse is the highest and best use of dredged material. Because we need a bulwark against sea level rise in the bay urgently. And finally, as Jim mentioned, we do have more public involvement coming. We are moving forward with the Look Back report, and it will be after we've been able to synthesize that and provide that to the public for comment that we will start the process of looking forward. What should the new LTMS of the future look like? How can we be more flexible in implementation of our policies to ensure that we can continue dredging in an environmentally sound manner, keep business flowing through the bay, and do better for beneficial reuse?
Hopefully, though, not many people would need to get an introduction from Colonel Baker, the Commander and District Engineer for Army Corps of Engineers. He assumed command in the San Francisco District this year in June 28th, and was raised in Texas. Commander Baker was commissioned in May of 1995 and has served in a variety of engineer, district, and troop unit assignments across the U.S. and through 3 combat tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I thank you for that. He is a registered professional engineer and a member of multiple professional organizations, including ASCE and SAME. So, Colonel Baker, if you'd like to make a presentation.
Thank you, Josh, and good morning to everybody. Again, my name is John Baker. I'm the Commander and District Engineer for the Army Corps of Engineers, and I've been in this job for about 5 months. So the new guy or excuse, I guess, is worn off. So I take full responsibility for my comments, and I've just got a few to share with you here this morning. So there's just 3 takeaways that I would leave you with, and as I speak to each one of these 3, I think that you'll see a theme among myself and the other panelists up here. The first is that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is an LTMS agency, and we are committed to balancing economic development with environmental stewardship. So, as most of you know, the Army Corps of Engineers, we're either the project manager or we're the permitting agency for all dredging work that goes on in San Francisco Bay. We're one of 5 LTMS agencies, and we maintain the Dredging Material Management Office as well as the database that office uses to to determine, based off all the beneficial reuse of the placement sites, what is the volume and if you want to call it the accounting for each of those sites. We are specifically charged with economic development and environmental stewardship, and we are perhaps unique amongst federal agencies with that mandate. As such, we are very proud in the San Francisco district of our history of performing the engineering and science that informs the regional environmental policy ahead of federal mandates. And we go back to 1958, where we were commissioned to do a study as part of the Reber Plan, which led to a report that was called The Future of the San Francisco Bay, 1960 to 2020, and the construction of the Bay Model, in which we modeled all of the San Francisco Bay Delta. And that then informed what some of the environmental policy and some of the advocates for the environment in this area years ahead of the Environmental Protection Agency. And so we're very proud of the work that we do, and we'd like to think that is informing future policy, as with this LTMS 12-year review. The second point I would make is the LTMS management plan from 2001 until the present, as Jason said, has been value added. And the first thing that comes to mind has been the alignment of the resource agencies and the streamlined permitting, so that those applicants that are going to do dredging work just have to go to one place, or generally one place, as opposed to chasing down permits from a myriad of different agencies. The LTMS has enabled the advancement of science to inform future environmental policy, and it's given us both the mandate and the funding for performing some of the research on regional sediment management and beneficial reuse, as well as some of the biological studies that have gone into the creation of the dredging windows and such. The last point under the LTMS management plan is that it has brought all the stakeholders to the table and allowed everyone to bring their issues up to the forefront, and so it's created some transparency. And we may not like what everybody else has to say, but at least we're all listening to it, and we're getting all issues out in the forefront and out on the table for discussion. The final point that I'd like to talk about is the future funding for LTMS and all Army Corps of Engineers Civil Works projects in general is uncertain. LTMS has been funded with past federal budgets, and thanks to the work of many in the audience, and I see Ellen Jonk in the back, and so thank you, Ellen, among others that have helped with that. But when we look forward, the federal budget has a lot of challenges, and there's reduced funding for these Army Corps of Engineer projects. The Corps of Engineers as an agency is undergoing what we call our Civil Works transformation, and we're trying to basically be the best stewards of the taxpayer dollar and deliver projects faster, better, and more efficiently. Some of the highlights or the key points of this transformation policy is that we are looking to reduce the number of active federally funded studies by 1/3 across the entire country. And this is not a salami slice, so every region or office or district doesn't get a 1/3 cut, but as an enterprise-wide look, cutting the number of studies by 1/3. Then, as far as which projects, whether they be studies or actual construction projects, get funded, the priority in a given budget year is for those projects which will complete in that budget year. And so the goal is to fully fund those projects first, rather than piecemeal out or incrementally fund a greater number of projects. And so every district office across the Corps of Engineers is trying to accurately and best represent their projects so that we can be most competitive for funding, but be honest and be good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. Now, the Corps of Engineers is a project-funded organization. We don't just get a slug of money and then just keep the lights on. So LTMS is a project, the way we look at it, and it's currently minimally funded, and we do so by taking a proportionate amount of money that has been appropriated to the projects that LTMS benefits. So all the dredging projects in the San Francisco district that are funded in the federal budget, we look at and we are very selective with what work we actually try to take on with LTMS, and then we take money from the projects that will benefit from that, and that's how we execute LTMS currently. So the way ahead is, and I mentioned this previously at a Bay Planning Coalition event, is to seek pairings of projects, those that create the dredge material and those that could use the dredge material, and trying to find a cost-effective way to link those two projects so that they can be most competitive for federal funding. Now we know what the dredging projects are, and we generally know what sites need the dredge material. So that's the easy part. The hard part is finding the cost-effective linkage between the two. I don't think we can count on another federal stimulus to help bail us out, and I don't foresee, if you want to call it an environmental multiplier, I don't see them changing the formula by which they prioritize projects for funding. So I think if your project is if you think it's competitive just based off environmental stewardship alone, I don't know if that's going to be captured anywhere in the formula. So the challenge is, I've flown, driven, or viewed by boat the majority of our projects and a lot of the sites that would beneficially reuse the material. The challenge that I personally see is, we know where we're dredging the material and we know where we want to put it, but in many cases there are miles of shallow or hard to reach the access, I guess, is what I'm getting at. That's the challenge. How do you deliver this dredge material across either a very shallow waterway or an unnavigable land access point to get the material where you really, really want to put it, and what would be the best and most beneficial reuse site? And so I don't know if there's a what the best cost-effective industry solution might be, but I welcome your questions and comments, and I would echo the sentiments of those that have spoken before me, that this is in effect an additional public meeting, and so I welcome your feedback. Thank you.
I think you and Jason both echoed a number of the same things. We were trying to foster economic and environmentally sound dredging, and we have some economic issues that are out there. It costs a lot of money to move material from point A, where there's access and deep enough drafts, to point B, where the beneficial reuse could be most beneficial. Wanted to echo what you were saying, that questions are welcome, and the blue cards are your avenue to do them. So if you could write down any questions you have, John can pick them up and I'll read them off to you for the panel so that they can help answer those questions. And with that being said, I think we could move to Mr. Goldzband and see what his viewpoints are on this important topic. And being the executive director of BCDC, you get to be involved in many different things. But Larry was quick to point out that he's been also on the other side too, and been with PG&E, and has been on both all sides of the stakeholder table. So with that, Larry, if you want to go ahead.
And I look at John because I've talked with John so many times over the past 3 months since I came on, and I now consider John the veteran because he's been here 7 weeks longer than I have. So that's why I thought I would at least say and be very honest with you that I'm the new guy. Although Jason, you and I sort of, we're pretty similar in that respect. It's not an obvious thing to quote Pablo Picasso when you want to talk about LTMS, but I think that there are some real interesting observations to be made here. Because as people like yours truly who aren't experts in art history or modern art take a look at what Pablo Picasso did, you sort of have to sit back and wonder, well, what does it all mean? And many times I think of that when I think of trying to figure out how to get from A to Z on a particularly difficult project. And Picasso always said, you just go for it. You just, action is the foundation of success. And ultimately, that's what LTMS really is designed to do. Because having been on the side on the governor's office and getting the mudlock calls back in the early 90s when I worked for a governor, and then having worked for the resources agency in the mid to late 90s and hearing all about it, I sort of have some appreciation for at least the history of the issue. But we also need to make sure that we recognize what LTMS's accomplishments really have been. First, there aren't any calls to the governor's office, at least not very many. And I think that that is a big, big part of the dashboard that we need to take a look at. And that previously disparate organizations have learned to coordinate. I'm not sure we've learned to collaborate, much less partner, but we certainly have learned to coordinate. And LTMS has provided a seemingly clear set of unified goals so that you all out in the audience have some better understanding now than you did 5, 10, 15 years ago about what the dredging process really entails. That being said, we can also take a look at the 19 million cubic yards that have gone to beneficial reuse as a major accomplishment. BCDC tends to pride itself on the fact that it takes us only 6 months to approve applications, and that most of the dredging actually occurs within windows in a reasonable time frame. What I don't know, but a question I'll ask is, has this all saved you any money? Has this all actually caused you to expend, as stakeholders, fewer resources to get a better product? And that's a question that I would have actually for you all. Anecdotally, I hear that it has. So from BCDC's viewpoint, essentially there has been a balance that has been struck that is both defensible and equitable between conservation and economic imperatives, even in this very, very difficult Pablo Picasso-like environment, where people outside of the dredging community may look at this process and think, what really is going on here? That being said, there are issues that we really need to deal with LTMS, and maybe this is why I would be called the new guy. One of my political heroes, one of my 2 or 3 political heroes, is Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the late senator from the state of New York. And I quote this all the time to our staff at BCDC, that everyone is entitled to his or her own opinions, but not his facts. We have to agree on facts prior to negotiation and prior to actually dealing with each other's opinions. And yet, what my concern is that even though we have this LTMS process, I'm not sure that we actually agree on all the facts we need to know prior to actually the LTMS process going forward in any one year. I was struck when I sat in my first LTMS 12-year review meeting, which I think, John, was your first one too, when we talked about the economic parts. And there were a few things that were said there that really struck me dumb. The Port of San Francisco quoted unnamed LTMS staff as saying, quote, "We don't care about prices," end quote. Well, I know here at BCDC we care about prices. And I'm pretty sure that the Corps and the EPA care about prices too. So I'm concerned that somebody who is a stakeholder would think that. So we need to get over that hurdle, and we need to agree on what the real facts are. We also need to agree on what the facts are in terms of actual costs of dredging and putting dredged materials at beneficial reuse sites. What causes the confusion about what's charged for the use of Montezuma, for example? Doug Lipton just came in the room, whom I've known for 20 years. And Doug said at that meeting, well, it costs you X amount of money. And everybody jumped up, waving their hands, and said, are you kidding? That's not the case at all. I think this then leads us to a great question, which is, what are the most important common metrics that we can use to make decisions that everyone can agree on, or just about everybody can agree on? And how do we measure the qualitative benefits? Because unless we can do that, we're going to continue, perhaps, to, in many respects, talk past each other as opposed to talking with each other. And then finally, and I'll pick on John here because it's candidly, the Corps is one of the huge players here, is the Corps is set up to have a legally mandated decision-making process. And what I want to make sure we try to figure out is how, as a group, we can help the Corps make sure that its decision-making process can be aligned with our decision-making process at BCDC and the EPA's decision-making process in a way that you all can understand the transparency and the way they all connect, and that they actually help implement region-wide environmental goals. So that being said, one of my other political heroes is Dean Acheson. And we have to take things one day at a time. Because as Dean Acheson said during the Cold War and right after World War II, you can only, everything comes one day at a time. So my questions for you all as stakeholders to inform me as the new guy, and this is the last time that I can say I'm the new guy because I think 3 months sort of cuts that off, is how do we begin to agree on those facts so that we can therefore maybe disagree or agree on what our opinions are? Or are we doing that well now? Because maybe I've only seen a snapshot. And like some of the polls before the recent presidential election, which are just snapshots, my snapshot is wrong. And that's okay. But I want to hear that from you all. Do we need to establish any new goals that promote shared responsibility, lead to real collaboration and partnership, and accountability among us all? What changes do we need to make at BCDC to our internal processes so that all the stakeholders we can help all the stakeholders and we can actually get to those long-term collaborations? And then finally, and this is something that I think we really need to work on hard, is what's the collective story? Because everybody's talking about how there's a shortage of funding. Well, you're not going to get funding for anything unless you have a story to back it up. What is our story, and how should we ask for help based upon that story from a unified position so that we can promote the region's goals? To me, those are some of the strongest questions that I need help from you to answer.
What does it all mean is kind of what we're here to try to summarize and make sure that any questions that we do have are addressed in the next version of the LTMS. And as Larry said, what are our new goals? Are there any new goals that are needed? That's, I think, one of the big keys. Are we going to stay with the status quo, or are there things that can be improved upon? I thought, from my perspective, working with the DMMO has been very productive. You're able to go to one place and deal with all of your issues at the same time. They hear each other's complaints, and you can really deal with them fairly quickly from a permitting perspective. So I think that's a great success of what the LTMS has been able to bring us. Doing things independently would be far more cumbersome, would take a lot more time, cost more money, etc. So that's one part of it, I think, that gets lost and should be acclaimed a little bit more. If any other questions are available, please give them to John, but I guess I could give a couple that are already here. And perhaps for Colonel Baker, we have a question for you, is what actions is the Corps taking to reduce the cost of dredging in the region? If you could come up with that.
Right, so that's a good question for us. And I guess what we try to do is we want to have the greatest amount of competition for our projects. I mean, we think that is going to help out ultimately our customers, the ports that are receiving the dredging work on these federally funded projects. We also have use of a government hopper dredge, which is owned by the Portland District, but they only have 2 of those hopper dredges, and they service districts all the way throughout the Pacific Ocean region. So not only Portland District, San Francisco District, LA, Seattle, Honolulu, and Alaska districts. And so they are looking at regionally where do they send the work. What we think we may do in this upcoming fiscal year is we may let a contract for a regional, or if you want to call it a West Coast hopper dredge contract for much of the work in which we would we would normally bring in a government dredge. We may seek a regional dredging contract and outsource some of that work. And we think that competition is going to be what's best for everyone. So that's the biggest one. We are trying to work with LTMS and find out if there are ways to reduce the unit cost for dredging per cubic yard of material. And it's something that we're always conscious of. And so within our dredging management material office, we're always looking at, for a given location, we know that the type of material historically is whatever that is, and then what are the potential sites that need that type of material, if you want to call it a match.com for dirt. That's we try to do that, but it's really hard because in certain places, you know, everybody, or not everybody, but certain people just want beach grade quality sand, and there's only a few places where you can dredge that type of beach grade quality sand, and then there's all types of restrictions, and we've got to take that material through a marine sanctuary, perhaps, if it goes outside of the bay, and then there are certain, I mean, we get, I guess you could say we get a little bit of political pressure from folks that want the material at a certain beach location on the coast, and certainly that's got a lot of attention now with the hurricane damage on the East Coast and the amount of effort that they're placing on beach nourishment. So I guess the bottom line is we look at, from a programmatic standpoint, we do measure the unit cost of dredging for every one of our projects by year, and we're conscious of that, and we also look at the bottom line. How much total did it cost to do the work each program year? And then we try to find a better way to do it. We've looked at, you know, is there an equipment solution? We don't have a government offloader or any kind of, you know, pumping system where we can pump material a longer distance or across a shallow area. Maybe some of you know someone who does, and we realize that there's a business decision that has to be made before something like that would be utilized. So, so it is something that we try to do. We look at the unit cost of our dredging. We're very, very conscious of the cost and try to minimize that to the greatest extent possible and be the best stewards of taxpayer dollars.
Thank you. I think a follow-up to that, though, you know, kind of relates to beneficial reuse locations, and you know, with Hamilton being no longer available, I know the Corps is the primary user of beneficial sites on a volume basis thus far, but as everyone gets to the 40-40-20 limitations here that go into full implementation in 2013, you know, the beneficial reuse sites are limited, and eventually their capacity is going to go away. And how do you, and this kind of goes to the whole panel, is how do you foresee projects and dredging volumes and really dredging needs going forward? You know, we've talked about reduction of in-bay disposal volumes from what we were at initially, about 6 million cubic yards, now to the 1.2. So, you know, what do we see going into the future? The Corps is being pressured with budgetary constraints, and so, you know, we're going to want to be more strategic in where we dredge, and that's going to go with any of the industry as well. So what do we see going forward as, you know, a mass balance?
Regionally, the biggest success story has come with the Oakland 50-foot dredging project, and how that material then went to a number of, I think, 3 different beneficial reuse locations. And from the Corps of Engineers perspective, the Hamilton Airfield Wetlands Restoration Project was a beneficiary of, I think, about 6 million cubic yards of that material. And on the justification sheets that go up with our budget request to DC, the J sheet, as they're called, we're limited to 200 words to describe those projects. In the very, well, I don't know if it was the very first line, but somewhere notably in the 200 words of each one of those projects, both the Oakland 50-foot deepening project and the Hamilton Airfield Wetland Restoration Project, they both listed the other project as, and so they were paired. And that's what I mean by that. And so these were two significant projects that had a lot of political interest and had a lot of media interest as well. And they were paired in our bureaucratic process at the very beginning. And so I think that's the way ahead, is if we can try to pair projects. But it's very difficult because it would, I understand it would take a commitment by a lot of people in advance of having all the information to make the best business case for your organizations. And so, and it may perhaps be a bit of a leap of faith because you don't know if the project would actually be funded. So I think we would try to make the best informed decision, and I guess whatever you need from the Corps of Engineers, to the extent we can provide it, we're willing to help out to try to make the best use of the taxpayer dollars and deliver on our mission and be stewards of the environment.
Anything from Larry or Jason too, or you want to follow up on that?
Well, actually, I'll just briefly echo what Larry said earlier in terms of telling our story. I think that that's really critical, and also gets to John's point about pairing projects. I think that the agencies and all the stakeholders can do a lot more to make that unified front that Larry was talking about in order to marshal the resources that we're going to need to overcome this challenge regarding the mass balance in the bay. And we're not going to be able to do it without us all getting together on that. Did I just steal your thunder?
You did.
I'm sorry. What
Ditto. All right, well, I think I have a good follow-up question to that is, we have these limited number of beneficial reuse sites in the bay, and as was alluded to early on, a lot of them are far away from where you can bring the material to. So you either need to dredge to get there, or perhaps do things on a bigger basis. The aquatic transfer location has been brought out as an option, but we have other supporting agencies like NOAA, which would be theoretically against such a kind of thing. So how would we involve the designation of aquatic transfer site in relation to somebody like NOAA? And I think, Jason, that might be best for you.
Sure. I think that, again, that's a task for the management committee members and some who aren't here today with NOAA and the resource agencies to, again, really focus on getting on the same page about what our larger goals are and what the outlook is for the immediate future. And I think we can do that. I think that we all have a number of policies to operate within the existing LTMS to be flexible with how our agency implements those policies. And but I think that that is the challenge before us, is really building on the success of LTMS that brought all these disparate interests together and bringing us more tightly together, so that we focus on a few things, a few big challenges in the years ahead, and be as flexible as we can in getting there.
I was actually going to say one thing that I thought was striking just in the 3 months that I've been here, which is that I've spoken, and Jason and I have spoken, and John and I have spoken, but interestingly enough, I haven't seen a panel that involves Fish and Game and Fish and Wildlife and NOAA. And I know that they're out there, and I've met a number of them, and they're great people, and they do their jobs the way they're supposed to do their jobs, I think. But it's almost as though we're looking here, and I know why John's having us here, and it's a great thing, John. There's also another set of stakeholders here that we also need to make sure that we include in the discussion. Because if we don't, then we're never going to have a common agreed upon set of facts over which we can disagree. And so it seems to me that one of the things that we need to do as a leadership group in LTMS is to corral them, bring them in, and really have serious discussions about what the regional agencies really need to do and what what their goals are, and to make sure we can align with their goals as well, because they're under candidly some of the same pressure that we're all under. I mean, Fish and Wildlife and Fish and Game, have budgetary pressures just like we do, and so as a result, we all need to be able to work together and get through a set of agreements so that we have some kind of predictability in the future.
Thank you. And we have the policies and procedures that we need to do, and then there's the implementation of them. We have dredge windows, which limit the utilization of equipment. Therefore, there's less competition, higher prices. Doing things like pre-dredging, so you can do more volume at once, kind of akin to the aquatic transfer station, so it's an economy of scale. How would that then go to a regional management? And I think this goes to Larry, is how will the regional sediment management plan that BCDC is undertaking build upon the LTMS, and do you think that is a duplication of efforts?
I'll answer the second question first. I don't think it's a duplication of effort, because just like everybody sitting here and just like the other agencies that aren't in front of you, we all have our own statutory responsibilities. So we just have to sort of deal with that. How does it fit in? I don't know. I'm the first person to tell you that I don't exactly know how it's going to fit in, but I can tell you this much: it's going to. Because the last thing we want to do at BCDC is to duplicate, and we want to instead leverage, and we want to complement. One of the things that we're doing at BCDC with our commissioners is starting to educate them about the entire sediment management issue. At the meeting 2 meetings ago, we actually had I think, a tremendously interesting briefing and discussion on sand mining, which was to a great extent news to most of our commissioners. And so as a result, what our process is going to be, in part in the public, is educating our commissioners not only about sand mining, but we also plan to have, and thankfully John and Jason have agreed to participate, a panel at some point in the late winter, early spring on LTMS. And we'll get questions from the folks from Contra Costa and from Alameda County and so on about their projects and how it fits into LTMS and so on. We'll have a panel discussion about how we can, and we'll educate our commissioners about that. So, and our commissioners are going to make sure that everything fits. So I can't tell you now what's going to happen in 6 months like that, but I can tell you that it will complement and it will leverage. That's as much as I'm going to be able to say.
Thank you. I think that leads well into, you talk about the other smaller entities, like a City of Martinez or Contra Costa or whatever. How about a localized area plan for management near the site of dredging? How would we help facilitate those kinds of cooperations under our current system?
So I guess one question, not that I want to answer your question with another question, but
or maybe you
I'm
do.
interested. I would be interested. I've not asked for, nor have I received feedback from industry on has the Corps of Engineers on any of its dredging contracts done at a pre-solicitation meeting, maybe shared with industry, both those that dredge and those that use dredge material, and maybe laid out for a given fiscal year, say fiscal year 13. Here is the dredging work that we think we're going to do at all of these locations, and here has historically been the type of material that has been dredged and the quantities dredged, and then here's our running list of sites that need dredge material, and here is typically the type of material that they need, and then has the Corps of Engineers invited parties from both sides to a pre-solicitation meeting so that the Corps of Engineers can step back, we put everybody in the same room, they can do speed dating or whatever and figure out perhaps if they can find some pairings that are mutually beneficial and cost effective, so that when the solicitation for the dredging work actually goes out, then you have the most informed decisions. Because I've talked with some folks that needed the dredge material and they didn't even know what projects were out there and what projects and what sites specifically might need material. They just know that they see somebody dredging a mile away from where they need, and they're like, how come I can't get some of that? Well, there's more to it, but that would be very helpful, I think, for the Corps of Engineers if we had that information. But I think we maybe have to take some action first before we can get the feedback.
I think that works. In the current language, we have some challenges to selecting beneficial reuse sites. And I'd like to know what you think the Corps would be doing to increase the amount of beneficial reuse on its dredging contracts, because it's not a requirement, it's just if it's an okay, or if it works into the process. So are there any changes going to be occurring that could help facilitate that?
I guess for the sake of expectation management, I'm going to say no. That our contract language, at least for this fiscal year, will remain the same. We'll put out in the solicitation that it'll say, I think we're going to solicit the least cost, environmentally acceptable bid, and that I think we're going to ask for a beneficial reuse option. But ultimately, we're going to make a decision on the low cost, environmentally acceptable, practicable offer. I think that's what we're going to take. So we're not, unless required in some sort of legislation, we're not going to say you will take your material to a beneficial reuse if it's known that that is more expensive. So it's ultimately going to be tied to the value for the American taxpayer and the taxpayer dollar. So it's ultimately the money is going to be the driving factor with what's environmentally acceptable and practicable.
So it's basically in line with what the industry is going to have to do too, which is, they're going to take to Alcatraz as much material as they possibly can because it's the cheapest alternative, and then find other things that fit the bill to satisfy the 40-40-20. I think only time for one more question. There's a few here, and I apologize if I wasn't able to get to yours, but we all kind of talk around during the presentations that we think that the LTMS has been a success, and I would echo that sentiment too. But I'd also try to challenge everybody on the panel onto looking ahead. There's the idea of sediment-starved system, there's sea level rise, etc. Are there going to be any major changes to the goals and objectives of the LTMS as we move forward? And that's just a panel-wide question.
Well, I'll take a first stab. I think that it's too early to say definitively if we're going to have changes to the goals. Our preliminary feedback and consensus is that the goals are pretty good, and we have existing flexibility within our system without reopening the entire NEPA process and CEQA process that could consume a lot of resources on changing the program considerably. So we're looking, in all likelihood, as a preferred option to look at administrative and process ways that the agencies can be more efficient under the existing goals, but we haven't thrown out the option. And again, where we are today is in the LTMS look-back phase and wrapping that up, and then we'll be looking to come up with recommendations on how we move forward.
Great. Anything from the Colonel or Mr. Goldzband?
I would say this, and that is that I would be surprised if a few commissioners on BCDC wouldn't ask the question, how does sea level rise affect LTMS? Because BCDC has done so much work on sea level rise and we are working and trying to work so closely with local governments and other stakeholders as projects are developed around the bay, that I think that the one thing that I can tell you for sure is that we will, starting from the staff basis and so on, try to make sure that we have some kind of reality check with regard to what BCDC has done over the past couple of years in terms of sea level rise. Because if we don't do that, then I think that we miss out on a big chunk of what BCDC's history has been. So the answer on sea level rise is we will certainly factor that in as we start to look forward.
Anything from you, Colonel?
I'll just say that I've got some really smart people with PhDs and decades of experience that are working on sea level rise, and we apply that to all of our projects, not just whether they be flood risk management or beach erosion or dredging. And so LTMS is no different in that respect. We've got folks, and many of you may know Tom Kendall, who's our Chief of Planning. So he and his team have contributed to Corps of Engineer-wide as well as coastal engineering publications and professional discussions at the national and even the international level on sea level rise. So we certainly are taking that into account in our views on and our work on LTMS and all of our projects. So I can't speak to exactly what that is, but I know that I got really smart people that are working on it.
Great, and I think with that we'll kind of sum it up. Thanks to all our panelists with their unique insights and opinions. I think we've looked pretty well into the past, and I look forward to what the future of LTMS is going to come out with all of these smart minds that we have, hopefully addressing the problems that we have. Thank you.